This video is a Nitro 101. I'm going to talk about some of the basics for tuning and troubleshooting Nitro engines. Now, I have here that this is based on a Traxxas TRX 3.3 engine. The reality is this applies to any engine that has a 2-needle system, a low and a high needle system. Now, the first thing that we need to look at is the following. First, you need to check your glow plug. Make sure you have a good glow plug. Make sure that you have good fuel. We're going to start off with 20%. Just imagine you have 20%. That's actually a good starting point for these engines. Make sure all your batteries are good, servos and links are operating correctly and to the correct lengths so that the carburetor opens fully and closes fully. There's nothing getting in the way. Air cleaner, make sure the air cleaner is clean. Also, check everything else mechanically, just the build, mounting, connections, wires, all of that, fuel tubing, make sure all of that is good. Fuel tank, make sure that is good, tuned pipe, etc. Now, once we have that checked, idle needle. The idle needle adjustments will adjust your idle. And if you look from the top, so imagine this is where your air cleaner goes in, so this is where the air comes in. The idle needle is the one that goes in at an angle. So when it goes in at an angle, there'll be an adjustment off to the side, and this will be angled. And what this does is this limits how much this can travel. Now, if you're idling too high, you want to back this out. So this is the part that you back out, and this will generally decrease your idle. Now on a Traxxas 3.3 engine, generally it should be about 0.8 millimeters. It can be a little more, it can be a little less. It depends on ambient temperature, barometric pressure, and a lot of other small little things. But generally you're looking at about 0.8 millimeters, sometimes 0.7, 0.9, somewhere around there. Now, when this happens, you should have a good idle, assuming all other settings are correct. It is possible, for example, for the idle screw to be backed out so far out that it no longer holds this in place, and this is limited mechanically by this section. So generally your linkage and your arm would be over here on this side, and that's what would move this in and out. This is on a slide carburetor. There are rotary carburetors, but again, because we're using the TRX engine, it's a slide carburetor. At this point, if this screw is backed up all the way and it's still idling too high, then what you need to look at is your low end needle. So your idle screw and your low end needle can both affect the idle of the engine. The low end needle, this is something that also affects the idle speed. Now, in order to adjust this, right here near the linkage, so linkage would go right about here, and then this would slide everything in and out. You will notice that there's a little screw in here. If you back it out, so if you go left, it'll richen it. If you go right, it'll move it in, so it will lean it out because it's reducing the amount of fuel that can go in there. Therefore, if you've been working with your idle needle and your idle is way too high, you need to richen this here by turning it left. Start by maybe a 1/16th or an 1/8 of a turn. It depends on the nitro content that you are using. The lower the nitro content, the greater the adjustments. The higher the nitro content, the lower the adjustments you will have to perform. So again, if your engine, regardless of what you do to this, if it's still idling too high, this will have to be loosened to make it richer. Now we're going to go into that. So that, again, tighten to make it leaner, loosen to make it richer. So when you tighten it, it allows less fuel to go in. When you loosen it, it allows more fuel to go in. So if you tighten, lean, loosen, rich. High-end needle. The high needle adjustment, so this is another adjustment on your carburetor. This is generally that large portion that sticks out next to the air cleaner, and it also has another needle in there. And this is going to work just like the low end, where if you tighten it, you will lean. If you loosen it, so if you go left, you will richen. So you have to see what you need, and I will go into troubleshooting. So again, these two, if you tighten them, right, you're closing it, less fuel, you lean it out. If you loosen it, more fuel, because you increase the gap, you richen it. Now let's begin some of the actual troubleshooting. Now let's just say your nitro car, you have a new nitro car, or your nitro car should be in good shape, but the car will not start but feels like it wants to start, or it starts in the air, so the car is lifted off the ground, it starts in the air, and then dies when you put it on the ground. This is actually a common problem that occurs from time to time, especially with some Traxxas vehicles. It's not just Traxxas vehicles, it's vehicles in general this can happen to. But what you need to check is your spring and your clutch system. So this is your bell housing. This is your shaft from your engine. And you're going to have these two pins on the flywheel. So the flywheel would be back there. This is in front. These are your two clutch pads. Now, there are other systems that use more than two clutch pads. But again, Traxxas system, it uses two. So these shoes here have a spring. And the spring actually goes all the way around. There's a groove inside of this where the spring sits. So what can happen is you can just maybe get a weak spring breaks, or these shoes wear down to a point where the spring actually rubs on the bell housing and then breaks. Now, the way a clutch works is by centrifugal force. So if you're idling, the shoes are, as pictured, they're not in contact, or, I mean, they're usually in a small amount of contact. But there's not enough force pushing them against the bell to create enough friction to turn the actual engine. Once you accelerate, because of, again, like I mentioned, centrifugal force, these shoes will go in and out depending on if you accelerate or you're idling, right? So you let off the throttle, increase throttle, let off, increase, let off, increase. So it grips, doesn't, grips, does not. And what ends up happening when the spring gives out, these shoes will open up immediately during idle speed. So the vehicle will want to run forward, but the engine is not producing enough power at that RPM to actually propel the vehicle forward. So as soon as this happens, the engine will die. So generally all you have to do is just replace either the spring or these little clutch shoes. To be honest, if you're replacing the spring, might as well replace the shoes. Even if they look good, just replace everything. Now, troubleshooting. Say your car starts and idles, but dies when you give it throttle, or it accelerates like a dog. This is also a common problem. What this has to do is with the low-end needle. So if the car's idling, it seems fine, and then as soon as you give it throttle, right, you give it throttle and it just dies. Or it accelerates, but really, really slowly. It just takes a while to accelerate. What that means is that the low end is way too rich. So you have to lean this out, and the way that you lean it out is by closing it. So you go to the right. So you're going clockwise to close it. Again, start with low increments, maybe a 16th of a turn, maybe 18th of a turn. Depending on the nitro content that you're using, that will determine. If you're running, say, 15%, you can go 1/8 of a turn, no problem. If you're running 30%, you may want to go a 16th of a turn, for example, every time. But again, if your car is idling and then dies as soon as you apply some throttle, this is too rich. Close it by turning it to the right. Now, say your car starts but idles too high, and the idle needle is all the way out. Well, it's the opposite problem that you would have when it's too rich. So this means that now it's too lean. So if your engine, if this part here, this is your idle screw. If this is set, and it doesn't matter how much you back it up, let's just say this is backed up to the point where it no longer touches for some reason, and it looks like this. That means that your problem is here on your low-end needle. So what you have to do at this point is go to here and richen it out. If you lean this, your idle will increase. If you richen it, your idle will generally decrease. So you want to richen this out a little, but do not rich it too much where it no longer accelerates well or it runs like a dog. Or a hog, I should say. That's the expression. Now, next possible scenario. Car starts and accelerates off the line, but has a slow top end. This is also very common. Let's just say it also runs very cool. So you're not concerned about temperatures. You're running maybe somewhere between 75 degrees Celsius to 110 degrees Celsius. That's about 167 to 230. This is very, very cool for many nitro engines, especially for the Traxxas 3.3 engine. That engine can easily do 270 degrees. Don't be surprised if it hits 300 from time to time. Manufacturer does not recommend, though, running at 300 degrees. But if you've used them for a long time, those engines don't really care. So for newbies, it's an easy engine to work with. What ends up happening at that point, that means that your engine is running way too rich. If it's running that cool, right, as I mentioned, say 175 degrees Fahrenheit, 75 Celsius, and it's running like a dog, say you're running, I don't know, 10 miles per hour, 15 miles per hour, assuming your clutch is as tight as it should be, you need to lean this out because it's too rich. And the way that you lean it out is by closing it so you spin it to the right. Again, depending on the nitro fuel, if you're running about 15%, you will probably go 1/8 of a turn every time. If you're doing 30%, you may want to do a 16th of a turn, maybe even less at a time, to lean it out until you lean it just right. Remember that when you lean it out, you still want to have a light trail of blue smoke coming out of your vehicle. If you do not, then you leaned it out too much. All right, let's say that your car starts and accelerates off the line and is fast at top end, right? It's really, really fast, but it's overheating. And by overheating, I mean it's running 149 degrees Celsius, 300 degrees Fahrenheit, or more. This is really bad. You can destroy your engine with this, especially if you have the higher nitro content. Well, it really depends on the tuning. Anything above this temperature is really bad for your engine. What is happening in this case is your high-end needle is way too lean, which means that you need to open this up. So back it out, go left. So this would be counterclockwise, and lean this out. Now, if you've messed around with this, the high-end needle, and no adjustment seems to help, your car, goes top end really fast, but the temperatures are still way too high. There could be some other possible issues. At this point, check all the seals, make sure that everything's sealed properly, because the engine may be getting air from a different source that's leaning out the mixture. Check the bearings, especially the front bearing. The rear bearing is inside, so that one's not going to matter much, because the rear seal on the rear plate, that's going to create that seal. But the front bearing is what seals the front part of the engine. This is where the output shaft from the engine comes through. Check the tank, make sure the tank has no leaks. Sometimes the seal on top could have a leak, although usually what will end up happening is it'll be the tune pipe, but I'll get to the tune pipe. So there could be a leak on the tank, and I'll cover it with the tune pipe as well. Check all your lines. Sometimes you can have these minor little pinholes in the lines. So replace your lines every so often. It all depends on how you run them. If you leave fuel on the lines, for example, keep in mind that nitro fuel is an alcohol-based fuel. So nitromethanol, so keep that in mind. Now check your tuned pipe line tap, which is this one here. So what happens is when your engine is running, the exhaust comes in through the tune pipe. Now there's two chambers usually, there's this one and this one. And then some of the gases will actually be pushed out this little tap, and then there's a fuel line that sends it to the fuel tank. And then the rest of the exhaust just goes out as normal. Sometimes this will crack or break, and not enough pressure will go through this line into the fuel tank, which is also the problem if the fuel tank doesn't seal properly, which means that it's not going to be able to push enough fuel, pressurize the tank enough to push enough fuel into the carburetor or to help the engine suck the fuel into the carburetor. The vacuum that these engines produce is not that great, so they need this extra pressure from the tune pipe to deliver enough fuel. If you're not getting enough fuel, you're going to be running lean. So those are some of the things to check. First, start with the screw. Try to richen it. Again, you richen by backing out to the left. If that doesn't work, then check all of these possible cases. Now, say the car starts and accelerates off the line and is fast at top end. So it just seems to drive great, but it has a double idle. All right, this is an issue. Now, a double idle on a vehicle is going to sound similar to this. The car is going to be running, and then when you come to idle, you get that dip, rises again, and then dips down to idle. That's what's referred to a double idle. What happens is, as soon as you close the throttle and you idle, it goes down because it closes, but then it goes up again, and then it goes down. So a double idle is generally caused because you're running too lean. So you want to back this screw out a little. So go to the right, just back it out a little, again, maybe a 1/16 of a turn, 1/8 of a turn, depends on the nitro fuel and your engine. And what ends up happening, the reason why it has that double idle, so say you're running up here, you let off, drops, and then goes up again, is because it leans. So the engine starves for fuel for that period of time. So if you remember from other parts of troubleshooting and how this works, when the carburetor is lean at idle, the idle increases. So your engine actually starves for fuel for that moment, and then once everything balances out, the idle drops again and goes back to normal. That's the cause of a double idle. Now, something else that you could check, again, you could potentially have leaks. So if this doesn't work, check everything, fuel lines, tune pipe, make sure there's no leaks on there causing this like sudden change in idle. Sometimes you can have a leak, and then when you accelerate, maybe it's on the tune pipe. There's sort of stress or pressure maybe on the tap, so nothing is leaking, and then once you let off, that pressure goes down, so it moves, and then there's a leak. There's a variety of things that can happen. So just check the seals, bearing, fuel tank, lines, etc. let's say your engine will not turn. So it's a new engine, somewhat new engine. Maybe you just ran the engine, you put it away for a few days, whatever the case is. Your engine will not turn. So you try to manually spin the flywheel, it will not work, or you engage the easy start and you just hear a little, just a little electric motor wanting to turn, but it cannot. There's a variety of things that can happen. One of the things that can happen is your engine could be hydrolocked. Which happens with this is there's a very small amount of space between the head and the piston when it's at top dead center. So if your engine gets flooded or you have fuel in there, the piston cannot compress it. So that's an issue. So what you have to do is just remove the glow plug. Remove the glow plug. See if you can spin the engine. Sometimes if you tilt the engine over so all of that fuel just comes out through the exhaust, that will sometimes work. Sometimes you can actually accidentally tilt the car over. Fuel will go from the fuel tank into the tune pipe, and then if you play around with it, bad luck. I don't know how you would do this. Actually, I'm thinking of ways that this could happen. Then the fuel could just run back through your exhaust. Keep in mind that you need to clean out your tune pipe because sometimes you do get residue in there, liquid. And if you turn the engine over, that could go back into the cylinder and then just hydrolock your engine. So the easiest thing, just remove your glow plug, see if it turns, and then if it cranks, crank it, just put a little towel or something to collect all the fuel that it's going to shoot out the top. Put the glow plug back in, and you should be ready to go. Now, always inspect, make sure there's no foreign objects in there. When you remove the glow plug, make sure the glow plug is good and it's not fouled. One of the worst things that can happen is when you remove the glow plug, a little piece of the spring inside breaks and falls inside of the engine, and that's just destruction waiting to happen if it didn't happen already. Another thing, when you remove the glow plug, make sure that surface is clean so as soon as you pull that out, nothing drops in. Now, something else that could cause this lock is lubrication problem. Maybe you ran the engine too hot, or instead of killing the engine, you ran it too lean. Say the fuel content in the tank was too low, so as it was sucking the fuel, it was sucking the fuel in mixed with air, so it was too lean. You ran it too hot, which means that you burnt off the oil in there too soon. You didn't get that film of oil to lubricate all the components. What you do in this case, you're going to need some free oil, and just remove the glow plug, put a little drop in there or two, and then just wait and see if you can spin it. Usually this will solve the problem. If not, then your engine just wants a little more attention. Hopefully that's the case. You can remove the back plate and lubricate that. You can also remove the head and then just lubricate, make sure everything's free, and then assemble everything together. And then usually the engines will just, assuming they're good, they will spin right up. They will spin freely. So just a little note, when you stop running your engine, if you actually just remove that back plate and then just douse it with a silicone base, for example, WD-40 silicone base, that generally keeps the seals lubricated, just because they swell up a little. So, but don't overdo it. You can spray some WD-40 on the carburetor. You can remove the glow plug, a little WD-40 there as well. Something that works really, really well, if you don't have after-run oil, you should have some, but say you don't have any, it's too expensive, whatever the case is. If you buy a transmission fluid with a little dropper, just put a drop of transmission fluid into the cylinder. So remove the glow plug, put a drop in there, and then put the glow plug back in. Transmission fluid does wonders. It smells though, just keep that in mind. That's something to consider. So I hope these basic pointers are helpful for those of you that just got your nitros for the first time. Maybe don't have that much experience with them, or you had experience, but you've taken such a long hiatus, you're getting back into it. If you have any questions or comments, please post it in the comments. If I miss something, please post it as well. If you have not subscribed, please subscribe. And for those of you that are considering nitros, don't be afraid of them. I know a lot of people talk negatively about them and they may discourage you, right? Those people may discourage you from getting one, but don't be discouraged. It just takes just a little patience. That's really it. Again, thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Please subscribe.